Hey everyone, Razzbowski here, and welcome back to the Five Nights at Freddy's novel. We're moving on to chapter 3 today, so if you guys are hyped, then please hit that like button. They headed to the school in a caravan, the boys in Carlton's car, Marla following, and Charlie bringing up the rear. We should have carpooled, Jessica said idly, staring out the window. It hadn't occurred to Charlie. I guess, she said. On the other hand, I'm not sure I want to ride with Marla and Jason, Jessica said plainly. Yeah, they're kind of intense, Charlie agreed. When they arrived, the parking lot was already jammed full. Charlie parked on a side street in which she hoped was a legal spot, and they walked to the school along the familiar sidewalk. Jessica shivered. I've got goosebumps. It's weird to be here, Charlie said. The school looked unchanged from the outside, but the fence was new, slick, black plastic-coated chain link. The whole town was like this, a mixture of old and new, familiar and not. The things that had changed seemed out of place. The things that had remained the same made Charlie feel out of place. It must be so strange for Carlton to live here, she thought. This is a nostalgia trip for you, but I just live here, he had said. Somehow, Charlie was not sure she believed that. When they got to the playing field behind the school, the bleachers were already full. Rows of folding chairs had been laid out in front of them to add more seating, and Charlie spotted Marla and the boys at the front. Oh, great, she said. I don't want to sit in the front row. I don't mind, Jessica said. Charlie looked at her. Of course you don't, she wanted to say. You're... you. Yeah, she said instead. No big deal, half the town must be here. She observed as they made their way to the group, where 2 seats had been saved. There was one open in the front row next to Carlton, and one behind it beside Marla. Jessica winked at Charlie and sat down next to Carlton. She leaned it toward him and they started whispering. Charlie repeated herself to Marla. There's a lot of people here, she said. Yeah, Marla said. I mean, it's a small town, you know. Michael's... it was a big deal. Plus, his parents still live here. People remember. People remember. Charlie echoed softly. There was a small raised stage set up in front of them, a podium with 4 chairs. Beside the chairs, a screen was suspended, projected on it a larger-than-life picture of Michael. It was a close-up, just his face. It was not the most flattering picture. His head was thrown back at an angle, his mouth wide open in laughter. But it was perfect. A joyful moment, snatched up and kept, not curated. He looked happy. Darn it, Marla said softly. Charlie looked at her. She was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Charlie put her arm around her. I know, she said. The sound system came on suddenly with a whine that slowly faded. 4 people walked on stage. A heavy-set man in a suit who went straight to the microphone. An elderly woman and a couple. A man and a woman. The man in the suit stepped up to the podium and the elderly woman sat down in one of the 4 chairs. The couple stayed back. They did not sit. Charlie knew they must be Michael's parents, but she did not recognize them. When she was young, they had just been parents, a species that was, for the most part, unremarkable. She realized, suddenly, that she didn't even know their names. Michael's parents had not gone out of their way to interact with their son's friends, and Charlie had literally spoken to them as Michael's mom and Michael's dad, as if those were appropriate forms of address. The man at the podium introduced himself as the school's principal. He had said a few things about loss and community and the fleeting preciousness of youth. He talked briefly about Michael's kindness, his artistic talent, and the impression he made even as a small kid on everyone he met. It was true, Charlie reflected. Michael had been an unusually charismatic child. He wasn't exactly a leader, but they all found themselves wanting to please him, to make him smile, and so they often did things that they knew he wanted to do, just to make him happy. The principal finished and introduced Michael's parents, Joan and Donald Brooks. They stood at the podium awkwardly, each looking from face to face in the crowd as if they were not sure how they had gotten here. Finally, Joan stepped forward. It feels strange to be up here, was the first thing she said, and a murmur of something like agreement swept quietly through the crowd. We are so grateful to all of you for coming, especially those of you who came from out of town. She looked directly at the front row, talking to Charlie and the others. Some of Michael's friends have come from all over, and I think that is a testament to who he was that 10 years later, with your lives on new paths, moving on to a whole new stage of life. So close to the stage, Charlie could see she was about to cry. Tears wavering in her eyes, but her voice was steady. We are grateful you are all here. We wanted to give Michael a legacy with this scholarship, but it is clear that he has already left one, all on his own. Marla grabbed Charlie's hand and Charlie squeezed back. I want to say, Joan continued, something about the families who are not here. As we all know, Michael was not the only child lost during those terrible few months. She read out a list of 4 more names, 2 girls and 2 boys. Charlie glanced at Marla. They all knew that there had been other children, but Michael's death had loomed so great in all their lives that they had never talked about the other victims. Now, Charlie felt a pang of guilt. To someone whose little girls and boys had been as vital as Michael, to someone their losses had meant the end of the world. She closed her eyes for a moment. I can't mourn everyone, she thought. No one can. Joan was still talking. Although their families have moved on to other places, those young boys and girls will always have a place in our hearts. Now, I would like to call to speak a young man who was particularly close to my son. Carlton, if you would. They all watched in surprise as Carlton stood and climbed up to the podium. Joan hugged him tightly and stayed close to him as he pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. He cleared his throat, looking over the heads of the crowd, then crumpled the paper up again and popped it back in his pocket. I don't remember as much about Michael as I should, he said finally. Too much of those years is a blur. I know we met when we were still in diapers, but I don't remember that. Thankfully. There was a soft titter through the crowd. I do know that as far back as I have memories, Michael is in them. I remember playing superheroes, drawing, which he was much better than me, and as we got older I remember, well, playing superheroes and drawing. What I really remember, though, is that my days were always more exciting when he was in them. He was smarter than me. He was the one always coming up with new ideas, new ways to get in trouble. Sorry about those lamps, by the way, Mrs. Brooks. If I had jumped the way Michael had said, I probably would have only broken one. Donald laughed, a gulping, desperate sound. Charlie shifted uncomfortably and pulled her hand from Marla's with an apologetic half-smile. Their grief, naked, was too much to watch. It was raw, an open wound, and she could not stand to look. Carlton came back down to sit with them. Michael's grandmother spoke, and then his father, who had recovered enough to share a memory of taking his son to his first art class. He told the crowd about the scholarship for a graduating senior who has demonstrated both excellence and passion in the arts, and then he announced the winner of the first one. Anne Park, a slight Vietnamese girl who came up quickly to the stage to accept her plaque, and hugs from Michael's parents. It must have been strange for Anne, Charlie thought, her honour so overshadowed by its origins, but then she realised Anne must have known Michael too, however much in passing. After the ceremony they went to say hello to Michael's parents, hugging them and making sounds of condolence. What do you say to someone who's lost a child? Can it be any easier? Can 10 years make a difference, or do they wake up each morning as fresh with grief as the day he died? On a long cafeteria table by the stage, pictures and cards were collecting slowly. People had brought flowers, notes to Michael's parents, or to him. Things they had remembered, things they had wished they had said. Charlie went over and browsed through them. There were pictures of her and the others, as well as of Michael. It shouldn't have surprised her. They were all together constantly, as a group or in rotating groups of 2 or 3. She saw herself in the middle of a smiling pose. Her, Michael and John, all covered in mud with Jessica beside them, still perfectly clean, refusing to go near them. Charlie smiled. That looks about right. In another, a 5-year-old Marla struggled to support the weight of her newborn little brother, with Lamar peering suspiciously at the tiny thing over her shoulder. Some of Michael's drawings were there too. Crayon scribbles professionally, incongruously framed. Charlie picked one up, a drawing of what she supposed was a T-Rex stomping through the city. It was actually, she realised now, almost amazing how talented he was. While she and the others were scribbling stick figures, Michael's drawings looked realistic, sort of. That's really good, John said over her shoulder. Charlie startled. You scared me, she said. Sorry. Charlie looked back at the drawing. Whatever it was better than what she could draw now. Suddenly her chest tightened, gripped with loss and rage. It wasn't just that Michael died young, it was what it had truly meant. He had been stopped in his tracks, years, decades of life snatched and torn violently from him. She felt herself well up with youthful indignation, as if she were a child again, wanting only to whine, "It's not fair." Taking a deep breath, Charlie set the picture back down on the table and turned away. The gathering was continuing, but she needed to leave. She caught Marla's eye, and Marla, as scarily intuitive as always, nodded and caught Lamar's sleeve. From their various vantage points, they all headed for the parking lot. No one seemed to notice their departure, which made sense. Except for Carlton, they were all strangers here. In the lot, they stopped by Marla's car. She had somehow called down a miracle and found a space right next to the school. "Can I play my game now?" Jason said immediately, and Marla found her keys in her purse and handed them over. "Don't drive away," she warned. Suddenly, Marla grabbed her brother and pulled him close, hugging him to her for a long moment. "Jeez, I'm only going to the car," he muttered when she let him go. "Yeah, maybe I should let you drive away," she said, giving him a little push. She cleared her throat. "So, are we going to Freddy's?" she said. They all looked at one another. "Yeah," Charlie said. "I think we should." Somehow, following this, going back to Freddy's seemed like more than a game. It felt right. "Let's meet there at 10, she said. "Hey, Jessica, can you ride with the guys or something? I'm gonna go for a walk." "You can come with us," Marla said. "I promised Jason I would take him to the movies." Charlie headed down the road without waiting to hear the rest of the discussion. A dozen feet or so from the lot, she realized she was being followed. She turned around. "John? Do you mind if I come? You're going to your old house, right?" "How did you know that?" "It's the only interesting thing out this way. Anyway, I went to see my old place too. It was painted blue, and there was a garden in the yard. It was weird. I know it wasn't blue when I lived there, but I couldn't remember what color it was supposed to be. Everything's so different." Charlie didn't say anything. She wasn't sure she wanted John to come with her. Her house, her father's house, it was private. She thought of the first time John saw the toys, his fascination and interest that was all his, that had nothing to do with pleasing her. She relented. "Okay, you can come. Is it..." He hesitated. "Is it different?" "It's really not," Charlie said. It wasn't quite true, but she wasn't sure how to explain the thing that had changed. They walked together for the better part of 3 miles, away from town and down old roads, first paved then gravel. As they neared the place, they left the roads, ascending the steep incline of a hill overrun with brush and trees that should have been trimmed or cut down ages ago. 3 rooftops peeked over the leaves, scattered wildly over the hill, but no one had lived in those houses in a long time. At last they walked up the driveway, and John stopped short, staring up at the house. "I thought it would be less intimidating," he said softly. Impatient, Charlie took his arm for a second and pulled him away, leading them around the side of the house. It was one thing for him to be there with her, but she was not quite ready to let someone else inside. She was not quite sure she wanted to go inside again anyway. He followed her without protest, as if aware that they were in her territory, and she would decide where they went. The property was large, more than a lawn. There were woods surrounding the wide space of the backyard, and as a child, Charlie had often felt like she was in her own little realm, ruler of what little she surveyed. The grass had gone wild, weeds growing feral and up to their knees. They walked the perimeter. John peered into the woods, and Charlie was struck by her old childhood fear, like something out of a fairy tale. "Don't go into the woods alone, Charlotte," her father had warned. It was not sinister, just a parent's warning. Don't get lost. Like telling her not to cross the street without holding someone's hand, or not to touch the stove when it was hot. But Charlie took it more seriously. She knew from her storybooks, as all children did, that the woods contained wolves and more dangerous things. She caught John's sleeve. "Don't," she said, and pulled him back from the woods, not asking why. Instead, he went to the tree in the middle of the yard and put a hand on it. "Remember that tree?" He grinned, something a little wicked in his voice. "Of course," Charlie said, walking over. "It's been here longer than I ever was." But he was looking at her, waiting for more, and suddenly she remembered. It had been a sunny day, springtime. They were 6 years old, maybe. John was visiting, and they were playing hide-and-seek, half-supervised by Charlie's father, who was in his garage workshop, absorbed in his machines. The door was open, and he would notice if someone screamed, but in short of that, the outdoors was their own. John counted to 10, eyes covered, facing the tree that was home base. The yard was wide and open. There were not many places to hide, and so Charlie, buoyed up by the excitement of the game, dared to hide beyond the forbidden edge of the woods, just barely past the tree line. John searched the other places first. Behind her father's car, in the corner where one part of the garage jutted out, the space between the porch where a child could just barely crawl. He realized where she must be, and Charlie braced herself to run as he began to walk towards the edges of the yard, darting into the woods and out again, looking behind the trees. When at last he found her, she took off, tearing across the lawn to the home base tree. He was just behind her, so close he could almost touch her, and she sped on, staying just out of reach. She hit the tree, almost slamming into it, and John was right behind her, bumping into her a second later, too fast to stop. They were both giggling hysterically, and then they stopped at the same moment, still gasping to catch their breath. "Hey, Charlotte," John said, stressing her name in the mocking tone he always used. "Don't call me that," Charlie said automatically. "You ever see grown-ups kiss?" He picked up a stick and started digging at the tree bark. Like he was more interested in that than her answer, Charlie shrugged. "Yeah, I guess so. Wanna try it?" He still wasn't looking at her. His face was streaked with dirt, like it often was, and his hair was sticking out in all directions. A twig caught in it above his forehead. "Gross," Charlie said, wrinkling her nose. Then, after a moment, "Yeah, okay." John dropped the stick and leaned towards her, his hands behind his back. Charlie closed her eyes, waiting, still not entirely sure what she was supposed to do. "Charlotte!" It was her father. Charlie jumped back. John's face was so close to hers that she banged into him with her forehead. "Ow!" he yelled, clapping his hand to his nose. Charlie's father came around the side of the tree. "What are you up to?" "John?" He pried John's fingers away from his nose. "You're not bleeding. You'll be fine," he said. "Charlotte, closer to the house, please." He then pointed his finger, directing them forward. "John, it looks like your mom is here anyway." He walked ahead of them, toward the driveway where her car had just pulled in. "Yeah, okay." John trotted off toward the driveway, turning once to wave at Charlie. He was grinning like something wonderful had happened, although Charlie was not quite sure what it was. "Oh my," Charlie said now and covered her face. Sure, it was bright red. When she looked up again, John was grinning, that same satisfied 6-year-old grin. "You know, my nose still hurts when it rains," he said, touching a finger to it. "It does not," Charlie said. She leaned back against the tree. "I can't believe you tried to kiss me." "We were 6!" She stared at him accusingly. "Even the littlest heart wants what it wants," John said in a mock romantic voice. But there was an edge of something real in it, something not well hidden enough. Charlie realized, suddenly, that he was standing very close to her. "Let's go see your dad's workshop," John said abruptly, too loudly, and Charlie nodded. "Okay." She regretted it as she said it. She did not want to open the workshop door. She closed her eyes, still leaning against the tree. She could still see it. It was all she could see when she thought of that place. The twitching, malformed metal skeleton in its corner, with its retching shudders and its blistering silver eyes. The image welled up in her head until it was all there was. The memory radiated a cutting anguish, but she did not know who it belonged to. To the thing, to her father, or to herself. Charlie felt a hand on her shoulder and opened her eyes. It was John, frowning at her like he was worried. "Charlie, are you okay?" "No." "Yes," she said. "Come on, let's see what's in the workshop."